World at 6. Good evening. From CBC News, Toronto, Canada's new Governor-General is appointed, and there are changes in the federal cabinet. We'll have special reports. 15 men are dead in the British Columbia mine explosion. And the United States Vice President explains American policy in Vietnam.
The number of dead in British Columbia's worst mining disaster in 37 years now stands at 15. It's feared that the toll could go higher. Of 9 men still in hospital, 4 are in critical condition. The BC Minister of Mines is still at the site of the disaster at Natal in the southeastern part of the province, leading an investigation into the coal mine explosion last night. Premier Bennett says his government will act on any recommendations the minister brings back to Victoria. 2 disaster funds have been set up to aid the families of the dead men, 14 of whom were married.
My father worked in the mine. He came here in 1927, and I was born in Natal on September the 14th of 1940. And I lived in Natal for the first approximately 18 years of my life, going to the old stone school between Michel and Middletown. As you came in from the direction of Fernie, you would first run into the village of Natal, and it occupied probably 2/3 of the area. Beyond that, there was quite a tiny sort of mining area with a lot of company houses, and that was known as Middletown because it was comfortably placed in the middle of Natal and Michel. And so Michel was the last little portion of that whole town that you met as you went towards Crow's Nest in Alberta. The local hospital was in Michel. As you came down towards Middletown, there was the company store, the old Trites Wood store, and probably a liquor store, and the CPR station. And then as you moved towards Natal, the huge stone school. And then Michel was basically a one-road town with a lot of houses on the main alleyway and in the back alleyway, and a collection of very, very small businesses and many hotels because the miners like to drink. But it was a great town in which to have been brought up. There were approximately 1,400 people living there, 1,500. But they all looked out for you.
You were part of every family there. Nobody worried about the kids out on the street or anything like that. When I say nobody worried, everybody worried. But I mean, you were just as apt to catch heck from the neighbors or somebody lived in Middletown if you lived in Natal. If you misbehaved, you were going to get heck. Everybody looked after the kids, and that was paramount. If you were a miner, you were part of a group, a very elite group, that kind of thing. Everybody was proud of what they did.
In addition to the whistle being something that was blown at 12 noon to remind people in the area that it was lunchtime, they also blew the whistle at about, I think it was 5 in the afternoon. If you heard the whistle blow at 5 in the afternoon, that meant that the morning shift had been canceled.
1947, I come here. I enjoyed working underground. People were friendly, you know, just like a family affair when you're working underground. Everybody looking after one another. Very, very good. You worked with 3 or 4 guys as partners, and you had to make sure you get your jobs done. And when I come here first, they had horses underground, and we were supplying timber for the mines underground when I first come. And then after that, they got rid of the horses. That's when I went back to pipe fitter after.
Well, I remember every once in a while I would go to the central office, which was part of their sort of the office financial building, where my father would pick up his pay packet. So they didn't deposit your paycheck or your balance in your bank account, as they do these days electronically. You actually went to the office and you lined up. The miners lined up, and they had a copper metal tag with their number on it, and I think they had to present their tag and identify themselves. And who was ever there in the financial department would locate his pay packet, all cash money, of course, and nicely sealed up, and present it to you. And so you'd go home with this pay packet.
That was a CNI. They treated us pretty good. I have no complaints about treatment for the people working underground. It was pretty fair.
Yes, but we still had the notion that the Crow's Nest Pass Coal Company was king. The Crow's Nest Pass Coal Company was king in the valley. It was like the old 16 tons. Do you remember that song? Tennessee Ernie Ford, 16 tons. What do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. So the Crow's Nest Pass Coal Company had a definite hold on all of the miners, I would say, in the area, particularly those in Michel, because most of those houses were company houses.
I worked in the byproduct plant. I worked in the tipple. I learned machinery very good, and then I eventually was offered a foreman's position with the underground mechanical, looking after underground mechanical equipment. And when we changed away from the old style of mining and compressed air and everything into electrics and that kind of stuff, well, that changed the whole aspect of underground mining.
Quite a significant oversight of the local store over those the people who dealt there. So I can remember my mother saying, when my father's pay packet arrived at home, I've got to give 60 to the store this week or this month. This pay packet, I've got to give 60 to the store. So we were always behind, right? We were always behind with our debts. And once a year at Christmas time, the local union, the local miners' union, would call to the union hall all the young people, the elementary school people, the middle school people, and the high school people, and they'd give us all $1.50.
I think I was the last person to walk out of the mine. I was in that mine that day. I was examining the machines, and we had 3 miners in there. I had been told that one miner on the bridge belt, they had a bit of a problem there every once in a while. So that was my specific purpose, was to look at that particular miner. I was down the bottom of the mine at the 843 place, and that day coming up, I went in there into 765, and a couple of the miners were there, mechanics that worked for me. Were repairing this, or working on the bridge belt, you see, and we determined that it needed a hydraulic motor, a hydraulic pump on that. So Guy Venzi and I, there was Delphi Corin, myself, and Guy Venzi. The rest of the fellows that were on their way outside, change of shifts. So Guy told Delphi, well, you take that hydraulic motor off, get the fittings ready, and I'll go out and get a spare one that I have in his pickup, you see, in his Jeep. As we suspicioned beforehand that that's what the problem was, and Guy had brought that with him and left it in the truck that day. So the two of us walked up the slope and out of the mine. We stood by the truck, by his pickup for a few minutes, and finally Guy said, well, I gotta go. I gotta run back in with this pump, to have things ready when the cross shift comes. So he went back in the mine, and I took the truck and went back to the machine shop.
I was a supplyman, eh? Then we had to clean the belts and all that, eh? We were supplyman. We'd stand outside for a while, and then everybody would go in. And you usually walked in with a couple of guys that you knew. Bring timbers in for the next shift. Have them all set up. So the next shift just come to work. I was 500 feet in.
The day of the explosion, it was on a Monday. We were afternoon shift. Irvin Mitchell and Freddie Churla, they were in the Legion. And I think it was Freddie Churla said, he was the operator, first operator. He said, well, I'm not going to work today. So Irv Mitchell said, well, geez, one of us got to go in there, So he was late getting there. So I was a little bit late getting in there. So when we got going, started walking into the mine, I remember looking way up ahead, right up at the corner, and one light was turning out of sight. Like you could see lights ahead of you and everything. And I knew it was Eugene Lucky, and I thought, well, no use running to catch up with him because by the time I caught up to him, we'd be in the face. But I can remember walking with guys, going along and talking to them, and then when you got to a narrow place, I would go ahead.
Left the wash house the same time as everybody else. And we drove past Balmer North. And we went up the mountain to where C-Seam was, and we got there. And usually the boys had a sandwich before they went in the mine, and their last cigarette. And we were waiting, went in, and we had no power.
And then all of a sudden it was a great big bright light. And what I thought it was up where Eugene Lucky was, on this corner you walked up, and they had these double doors for the pressure from the mine. So you'd open a little wee door in the middle of a big door, go in there, and you would close it. So it was like a vacuum seal thing, because you could never open this great big door with the pressure against it if you didn't let air. So that's what it felt like. I was pushing against this door, and finally got the door open. And as soon as I got it open, here was a great big light.
Didn't know what it was. And the wind just kept coming. And I got thrown up in the air. And I got thrown up against the roof bolts. They had roof bolts in the tunnel going in. And I got thrown up in the air about 4 or 5 times. And I don't remember no more.
In the April of '67, angels were turned to dust, and timbers touched the heavens. I looked to the smoke on the hill, the coal mine siren was sound. I wonder if that's my man. They're digging from the ground.
All at once, the sky turned literally what I would call black, and a sound resonated. I don't even know the magnitude of it, but it appeared to be very, very loud. And I looked up, and I could see Balmer North right from my house. and I could see clouds and spewed dirt and all kinds of things just being forced from the mine entrance. It literally blew debris and everything along this main street. So I knew instantly. There was no question in my mind. I turned to Phil Bortnick and said, "My father's dead."
I went into the wash house and was stripping my clothes off, to shower. Bobby Rothel come running in. He says, "Donnie, it blew." And I says, What are you talking about?" He says, "A North blew." And then he says, No. He says, "Balmer North blew." He says, "It exploded. It exploded." And then he left, you see. So I put all my street clothes on and jumped in my car and drove up to the mine. And it was just devastation. That's all I can say.
And we had a radio there that used to correspond with the warehouse in Michel. And we kept calling and we couldn't get no answer. Nobody was answering. And it just about got to the point where I was ready to go back down the hill when Harry Corrigan, who was the afternoon shift supervisor, come up in a half-ton truck and told us that Balmer North had exploded.
And he worked for Frank Vogel, the electrical boss there at the time, underground. Oh, white as a sheet. What's wrong with you, Frank? Balmer North just blew up. I said, "What the hell are you talking about?" So I jumped into the old 2-ton truck, 210, it was, I think, the number. Went over the hole. Of course, the people were already there last.
We couldn't do nothing, so I put the men back in the bus and we took them back down. And I told them, when we get down to, you guys have to have a shower, you go to the very far end of the washout in case they were using the back end there, closest to the doors.
So I got in the car with my one little son. He was only 18 months, 2 years old at that time. Drove to Sparwood. My mother was working in the coffee shop. That's what they called it then. And I said to my mom, "Dad's dead." And she said, "Oh my God, Sharon, don't say things like that." And then the whole thing turned into a gong show.
The mine rescue teams were already, getting together to go. Electricians were putting the fan out to start the fan up again so they could get air, in there. And boss said to me, "Go down there in the sheds where we come out of the mine, they dumped the coal down, and there was just an outside shack that the belt run in at the end. But it was all demolished." He says, "See if there's any bodies or anything down there." So that's where I went for the first hour and a half, I guess, or hour, going through everything, just looking to see if there was anybody down there, you see.
We waited around, went up and had a look at the mine. All you could see was black smoke and that, and so we went back to the wash house. We waited there till they started bringing the people out.
Must have been laying in there, and when the guys came in, this Bill Savello, his father was in that too, but this Bill Savello come in and he come over, and usually when you were in the mine, you didn't really recognize a guy by his face because everything was black, but you recognized the type he wore, or the way he wore his belt, or there was something about, that's how I usually used to identify if you didn't hear their voice or nothing. Well, he came over and I must have been in the ditch, and we were just covered with all of this mud from the thing. And he said, "Who are you?" And I recognized his voice because at one time he worked on the crew with us. And I said, "Oh, Bill," I said, "I've got tickets," because just that weekend he phoned down and asked me to get these tickets for the Rod and Gun Club for him and his wife, Margaret. And I said, "Okay, I'll get you a set of tickets and I'll get for me and my girlfriend and the woman that I married." So I said to him, "Don't worry, I got the tickets."
I was asked by Jess Anderson you've been in a mine rescue. I said, yeah, I got the ticket, yeah, and I got the fire boss ticket, yeah. Okay, but that's already 5 years ago. I don't know if it still goes. Well, but we need the electrician anyway. But you got the truck there, go to the sawmill. I already phoned them. They're gonna load up a load of lumber for the mine rescue to go in. Okay. So I said, well, where do I sign up for the mine rescue? It's too late, Jerry. But you'll be outside if we need you. Okay, good. So we waited on that.
I was the last one they found. I was wedged up between the timbers on the roof. I remember coming out. I remember the guys taking me out of the mine because I wanted to get off the stretcher. He said, no, you can't. I said, yes, I can. I jumped up and they pushed me back down. And they got a couple more guys to hold me down so that I wouldn't get up. Remember that? And then next thing I knew I was in the hospital.
People started coming to my mother's house, and the house was small and it was overcrowded, and everybody wasn't sure, and nobody was telling us what had actually happened, and everybody was saying, oh, your dad was on the back of an ambulance, but it was Henry Baranek, it wasn't my father. And then Maurice and my uncle Nick, who lived in Coleman, Alberta, disappeared to what seemed a long time to me. And my sister Joanne had hidden in the back of the truck and managed to get up to the site where they were going to see what they could find out. So here's this kid, 14 years old, trying to figure out what the heck had happened, right?
They brought one fellow out dead, and Bill Davy was a pit master at that time, and some more people. Ivanov, Larry Ivanov, ripped his chest apart or something like that. He died after in the hospital a couple of years after. And everything was upside down.
Some of the men at the forefront were so badly impaled with, now I'm getting quite emotional, impaled with the debris that came out at them, and being that coal is black, as Glenn Clark would call it, black, it impaled their faces.
They brought them in the wash house, and we put them underneath the showers, and get them ready. Bringing the dead out, and lay them on the floor and get them washed and ready to. Terrible.
Irv Morgan was there with a coroner, and George Fedoruk was the undertaker's helper that time, and he was cleaning up the bodies and stripping them. And I got a ride back up to Balmer North, and by this time, I guess it's well after 6, I would imagine. So there's no activity there doing much. They're trying to get the fan running again.
Anthony DeLuca went up the pole to hook up the fan, and then you could go in fresh air onto where you could change your mine rescue outfit.
And there was nothing that I could find, and in the meantime, they were busy getting into the mine and taking men out. The men were all along the roadway, all over there. Anyway, they were taking them to the hospital and what have you. And my boss said to me, you get up here there was a pit boss's shack there, had a phone in it, and he says, get us a phone line to the Department of Mines in Victoria, you see, and hold it open. Tell them it's an emergency, keep that phone open. So that's what I did for the rest of that until the next morning about 7 o'clock, I guess, or something.
But Morgan, who was he was a fire boss in Balmer North, or he was fire boss up at 7 seam, which is just up on top of Natal Ridge 2, just below where I was working. And he'd been in mine rescue for quite a while. Him and Peter Zeeth were there. And they'd just come out of the mine. And they did recover one body on the way coming back out. They brought one body out with them out of the tunnel. As time the fan had got going, and we got saddled up with all our equipment on, and we went in to start putting up the first stoppings for Bradish to start getting the air moving through the rock tunnel, over the top of the overpass, and down to the corner of the slope. And the top overpass, they'd knocked all the timbers out, the explosion, and it was caved. And there was a couple guys up there trying to secure it by not taking the loose rock off and that, and kind of making a pathway through so you could walk through. Because by this time we'd had the fresh air was going that far.
That was all mud in the faces of those dead ones, because when the explosion was, the mud in the ditches was in they got plastered. Some were, what you call it, suffocating. And well, I didn't have a mine rescue apparatus on. I only went to the first aid fresh air base, and they brought one after the other, and they recovered it to build up make it safe.
So we put up 2 seals there, and then we come out, reported. By this time it's dark outside. We reported. Then Bud's team went in, and I think they put up another seal. And then by this time, we'd phoned to Kimberley, and we got 2 mine rescue teams come in from Kimberley to give us a hand. And Jazz Anderson come to Jimmy Walsh, and he says, I want you to take your team to go down where Guy and Delphi were working. So Jimmy said, okay. So again, we got saddled up with all our equipment. Went down, we went over the top of the slope and down to where they were working. And so we found them, and we come back outside and reported where they were. And that, well, we knew they were dead, but you've known these people all your life. You're not shocked because you knew the end result already before you went there. You know these people that were there had never had a chance to survive that. Not an explosion like that.
So at 2 o'clock in the morning, that's when we were notified by a priest and an RCMP officer that came and said that my father had indeed been killed. He was 41 years old. Left 4 kids at home for my mother. I was the only one married.
And then when they brought the guy up, I said, oh, where is the guy? That's the guy over there. I recognized him on a high instep on his boots. He was a jet black hair guy, and his hair was all red when we brought him out.
So we went to Chismar's morgue, and I didn't want to go see my dad. I just wanted to keep the vision of my father alive. He was quite a handsome man, and I didn't want to really go see him. And my grandmother insisted, so I went to see him. And back then, they did the best they could. But you could see, visions of the trauma that he must have suffered still there. My mother, of course, took away a different view. She saw him as more handsome than the day she married him. I saw a man that was beaten and broke. That's what I saw.
I went home. When I got home, I didn't talk anything. My neighbor Hutchison, his wife, and Jerry is on shift. I thought, I hope he's all right. Well, when we call it Oma after. When I came out, I didn't go. I just gave her a kiss, I know, and went to the bedroom, and I flung her and I cried.
And then when I come to in the hospital, I could hear Irvin Mitchell talking. He was in another bed. And I'm laying on my back, and I put my hand up, and I knew I had my eyes open, and I'm like this here, but I can't see nothing. So, oh God, what a scary feeling, it was. And put my hand up and tried to clear my eyes out, and that was my left eye, and that was all cut up. And put my hand down, and then I started clearing it with my right eye, and what it was all the mud there. Well, when I started picking away at it, well, here the stuff is crumbling into my eye. But the first thing, I'm looking up at the roof, and there's a chandelier. Well, what a relief that was.
Well, Dr. Zod come see me. That was it. Put cast my foot, and that was it. I was in Sparwood here for quite a while. And then I told my brother to go to Vancouver. He said, okay. That's where they did all the operations and everything else. He wouldn't do it here. He was going to, but I didn't trust it. Because by the time I got to Vancouver, the bottom of my foot was black. He had it cast, and it started up my leg. And he decided to keep chopping.
The big thing I want to express is that the people, mine rescue people, or even those that weren't mine rescue will come in behind us once we got the ventilation going. The biggest heroes you could ever see in your life. As you went in there with explosion, and that thing could have blown again just like that. And so they're great people. Great people, those mine rescue people.
And the sad thing was that my father had a backache. He had slipped discs in his back. He was going to call and say he wasn't going on that shift, but he left it too late. And in those days, you just didn't call into work and not go. You went because everybody was expecting you to be there, right? And that Sunday before, he had been talking to my husband, and I could hear them talking, and he kept saying, my dad kept saying to my husband, that mine's going to blow. And Marie said to him, well, have you talked to people? And he said, I've gone as far up the chain as I could go. And they told me, Sitko, you either want the job, you got 4 kids to feed, or there's lots of people on the street, be happy to have your job. You went to work and they paid you and they owned you. And that's what I believe. They did own you. Nobody made a big fuss. The men were there for each other. The working men and even their fire bosses and but there was a difference in classification.
Everyday life carried on. That was the most amazing thing, that you'd meet people that were directly affected, with this, and yet that's the way it was. The life carried on, life went on, and kids went to school, and men went to work. And
I think there were already rumblings and political movements that were moving towards cleaning up the town, as I think government officials, I don't want to put the government officials in bad light, but I think there was the notion in those days that Michel-Natal, Middletown, as the sort of the entry habitable area to the whole province of British Columbia, the area was in pretty tough shape in terms of the coal operations themselves, the dust and the dirt that townspeople experienced. So I think there was a movement, even on behalf of the citizens of Michel-Natal, Middletown. There's a movement for them to sort of see the city, the village demolished. And I think that's how the provincial government was pushing the whole story as well.
I always remember that lady from California coming in and saying, I just drove through there. She said, what lives there? Who lives there? And that she meant coming through Michel into Middletown, which was probably the worst place compared to Michel and Natal, because none of the back alleys, nothing was paved. The slurry pile was as close to some of the houses that 20 feet away, 30 feet away, maybe, so I mean, it was pretty bad there.
But it wasn't an easy thing for most of the people who lived in Michel-Natal and Middletown, because the offers, and I'm trying to be as truthful as possible, the offers that were given to some of these people by the provincial government and other governments who were involved were not nearly enough to cover the cost of the properties that those people were going to be losing.
When we had to move out of Natal, well, we only got $4,000 for a house, and we had to go and buy a new house in Sparwood. It cost $20,000. I only had $4,000 of down payment, and the rest was finance. I didn't know what the hell finance was,
I don't know what to say on that, that it is wrong, the way it was all done and everything. I'll never change my opinion of that, We've got a wonderful place here in Sparwood and that, but it come at an awful price, They don't.
7,100 at the most for our complete house, a 3-bedroom house, and the 2-bedroom, the 1-bedroom house at the back. The handwriting was on the wall, and the displacement was going to take place, and so they took the offers that they were given, and they moved on.
But after the move out of Natal, you went to Sparwood. Well, some people went to Fernie, some went out of town. Split that family affair right in half. Made a big difference.
The demolition of Natal stands out in my mind. It was an unfair relocation. Yes, it was polluted, very much so. But it was an unfair relocation because nobody got a house for a house, which is what a lot of people figured. The closing of Memories was really a tough go. I mean, yeah, I know that when the winds blew off the dump, it made Middletown and Natal and Michel become dark. It was like, 1 o'clock in the morning at times.
Those people who had houses that lived most of their life in these houses and worked in the mine and stuff like that were, so told like, well, you've got to get out, and by this time, you got to be gone,
So it was going to be sad to have to move and to see it bulldozed. And of course, one of the last people to move was Joe Altomar, the bakery, the fellow who owned the bakery. And Joseph Altomar, who had operated the bakery for years and years, taking over from his father, was extremely attached to his business. And of course, they produced some of the best bread in Canada as far as I was concerned. So it was very difficult for him. And I can't recall the year in which he and his family moved to Sparwood. But I'm sure he was probably the last person to move.
Saw you waiting for the coffee to perk. You were sitting in that kitchen chair, tying your boots for work. Your hands had dust in the seams from the coal in the machines. In your sleep you tumbled with a head full of bad dreams. I looked to the smoke on the hill. The coal mine siren was sound. I wonder if that's my man they're taking from to call. A fear came over me. I was shaken to the core when I heard the knock from the priest at the door. I looked to the smoke on the hill. The coal mine siren was sound. I wonder if that's my man. They're digging from the ground, standing beneath the dusty trees where the small sparrow hid, with rain pouring down on that coffin lid. A thought overwhelmed me. I was cold to the bone, that putting food on the table has left me here alone. The mine took my man in the April of '67. Angels were turned to dust and timbers touched the heavens. I looked to the smoke on the hill. The cold